Thank you, John, for reading for us this morning. I posted about my sermon for today that it was to be about is religion irrational optimism. This is my longer question. Is religion, like sports psychology, an irrational optimism which seeks to banish the skepticism that is so useful for science? These are my two books. The first one, by Michael Syed, is called Bounce. Michael Syed was an Olympic table tennis player, I believe, but also a journalist and a writer. And so he's written this book, Bounce, The Myth of Talent and the Power of Practice. And the second one, Learned Optimism, by Martin Seligman, is one that I happened to pick up on holiday in Portland a few weeks ago. And I'm going to reflect on the message of both of these books today. So to begin with Michael Syed's book, Bounce. At the beginning of one of his chapters, he talks about two very well-known athletes. One is Jonathan Edwards, an Olympic athlete, a British Olympic athlete, and Muhammad Ali, the boxer that we all know. Both men had a faith. Jonathan Edwards was a Christian. Muhammad Ali, as you can imagine from his name, had converted to Islam. Both men attributed their sporting successes to their God. And Michael Syed looks at this fact and sees a contradiction, because in his mind the Christian God and the Muslim God are different gods. And so he writes this. This chapter is about the psychology of performance. We will dig down into the minds of top sportsmen and explore the relationship between mind and body under pressure. And we will arrive at the paradoxical conclusion that the thing that often separates the best from the rest is a capacity to believe things that are not true, but which are incredibly effective. He goes on to talk about the placebo effect. The placebo effect is the entirely false belief that a drug is effective. But this belief is not created out of nowhere. It is manufactured within a cultural context. And he talks about the way that things like the colour of the drug, the packaging in which it comes in, the cost associated with buying the drug, whether it is professionally administered, how invasive the treatment is. So, for example, an injection has a more powerful placebo effect than merely taking a pill. And the ritual involved in administering the drug. All of these factors have an influence on the placebo effect. But then he goes on later in the same chapter and he essentially says that religion is nothing more than a powerful placebo. I want to move on to Martin Seligman's book, Learned Optimism. Martin Seligman is interested in failure rather than success. He does talk about sports, but for example, what he talks about is he talks about the way that a sporting team will talk to themselves after a loss. And what is it that allows them to pick up the pieces, as it were, and move on to the next victory? And he uses this term optimism in the way that he is reflecting on these things. He talks about a thing he calls explanatory style. When you meet an obstruction, when you meet adversity, when you meet defeat, how do you explain it to yourself? And he makes this observation. It's a disturbing idea that depressed people see reality correctly, while non-depressed people distort reality in a self-serving way. He continues, as a therapist, I was trained to believe that it was my job to help depressed patients both to feel happier and to see the world more clearly. I was supposed to be the agent of both happiness and truth. But maybe truth and happiness antagonise each other. He goes on to quote a study that came out of the University of Pennsylvania, and it set a test for two groups of people, those who were clinically depressed and those who were not. And what they found was that the non-depressed people said they had more control over the test than the depressed people. Not only that, it said the depressed people were rock solid, exactly accurate whether they won or lost. They knew how much control they had. The depressed people knew. The non-depressed people invented a control they did not have. He goes on to say that depressed and the pessimistic are better at judging how much control they have over any given situation. They're better at judging their own levels of skill. They have a more accurate memory of past events. In effect, they are the realists. That's the depressed and the pessimistic. He goes on to say, perhaps what we have considered good therapy for a depressed patient merely nurtures benign illusions, making the patient think his world is better than it actually is. So, is religion a means by which we create and sustain an optimistic and an unrealistic worldview? Let's think about stories from the Bible. Abram, hearing the word of the Lord, as John read to us this morning. Then the Lord brought him outside and said, "Look now towards heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them." And he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. He's speaking to a man in his 90s with a wife in her 80s and promising him descendants he does not yet have. The realist says that's impossible. It can't happen. The disciples approached the Lord, and the apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." So the Lord said, "If you have faith as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, 'Be pulled up by the roots and be planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." It's impossible. But the Lord continues. "And which of you, having a servant ploughing or tending sheep, will say to him when he has come in from the field, 'Come at once and sit down and eat'? But will he not rather say to him, 'Prepare something for my supper, and gird yourself and serve me till I have eaten and drunk, and afterwards you will eat and drink'? Does he thank the servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I think not. So likewise, when you have done all these things which you are commanded, say, 'We are unprofitable servants. We have done what was our duty to do.'" Now, why does the Lord say that? You think about the disciples' question, their request. Increase our faith. What does this have to do with increasing our faith? One of the things I very much enjoy about Luke's gospel is his tendency to do this. He goes through the narrative and he will suddenly take a turn. You listen to it or you read it and you think, hang on, what's happened here? What's changed? What am I misunderstanding? You'll hear a passage and then suddenly it makes a shift. And here is one of these shifts. We have to realize Jesus is not a politician who dances around a question and then goes off on his merry way and says what he wants to say. Jesus is making a point here. He is saying something that we need to get hold of and understand. And this left turn that Luke takes is a means of bringing us up and making us think about this problem. Increase our faith. Well, Jesus has told a parable. He's using a natural story to give a spiritual lesson. There are things that are similar about this story, and there are things that are dissimilar to the lesson that we need to grasp here. If you remember, a few weeks ago we talked about parables in our Bible study group. So who is it that represents the servant, or is represented by the servant, and who is represented by the master? Well, that I think is fairly obvious. It's the disciples, us, who are represented by the servants. It is the Lord who is represented by the master. Now, is this parable teaching us something about our own need or something about the nature of God? And we have to be careful here, because if we get it wrong, we can misunderstand one part of this equation. Is God the demanding master who says, okay, you've done your work, come and feed me, and then I'll be satisfied, and then you can go and satisfy yourself? Is that the picture of God that we're supposed to pick up here? No, it's not. So we need to kind of set that aside and realize the message is about the servant. It is about our lives and our attitudes. God is not the lazy master or the demanding master. Now, I just want to mention each of these three images that are here. Ploughing the field, tending the sheep, and feeding or eating. Amos, the prophecy of Amos, chapter 6, we read these words: do horses run on rocks? Does one plough there with oxen? Yet you have turned justice into gall, and the fruit of righteousness into wormwood. At the end of John's Gospel, when the Lord meets the disciples again on the shore of Galilee, after they've been fishing, and Peter is reinstated in his ministry, and they have that lovely conversation between the Lord and Peter. What does the Lord say to Peter? He says, tend my sheep. And of course, the Holy Supper, a way in which we eat and share together. Do you see, each of these three images reflects some aspect of our religion. And as we get ourselves busy about doing these things, this is us going about our religion. So when the disciples go to the Lord and say, increase our faith, Jesus focuses upon what we bring to religion, not what we get out of it. What we bring to religion, not what we get out of it. In Secrets of Heaven, paragraph 2116. When people say that those are saved who have faith, they are saying something true. But in the word, nothing else is meant by faith than love to the Lord and charity towards the neighbour. And so a life that is derived from those loves. Matters of doctrine and established belief do not constitute faith, yet are part of faith. For these, each and every one, exist to the end that a person may become such as they teach. Again, in Heavenly Secrets, acting in accord with the Lord's commandments constitutes true worship of Him. Indeed, constitutes true love and true faith, as may also become clear to anyone who stops to consider the matter. And he continues, for there is nothing that a person who loves another and who believes in another would rather do than to will and to do what that other wills and thinks. His only desire is to know his will and thought, and so what is pleasing to him, as the Lord also teaches in John. He who has my commandments and does them, he it is who loves me. but he who does not love me does not keep my words. You think about the way we use the word believe. I have children who believe in animal welfare. And as a result, they have chosen to become vegan. They neither eat the meat of animals nor the product of animals. That is, for them, the logical consequence of their belief that they hold. And we say this in many ways, in many contexts. When we believe in something, it affects the way that we act, what we do in our day-to-day life. So a faith which is born out of inaction is no faith at all. It's not a hope that something might vaguely happen, possibly, in the future. It is the belief that it can happen and activity to help bring it about. It's interesting that Martin Seligman, in his book on optimism, recommends action as the cure for both pessimism and depression. Go and do something. But I also want to note that Martin Seligman doesn't say we should become eternal optimists. What he looks for is a balance. He writes this: in many arenas of life, optimism is unwarranted. In some situations, the cockpit of an airliner, for example, what's needed is not an upbeat view, but a mercilessly realistic one. He goes on, think about a successful large business. It has a diverse set of personalities serving different roles. There are optimists, but the company also needs its pessimists. A CEO must balance the two. And then a little further on he says, like the successful company, we each have in us an executive who balances the counsels of daring against the counsels of doom. When optimism prompts us to change and pessimism bids us to cower, a part of us heeds both. We can learn to choose optimism for the most part, but also to heed pessimism when it is warranted. I want to share one example from my own life. In 2013, our son wrote a musical. At the beginning of the year, Alex came to me. Now, Alex, I should let you know, never really had any formal musical training. He certainly learnt to play the guitar, he learnt to play the tuba at school, and he dabbled on the piano with my assistance. He never did any theory, he never did any composition studies or anything like that. But in 2013, in Year 12, he came to me and he said, I'd like to write a musical. What was my reaction? Well, I am a trained musician. I have done many years of piano, many years of theory. I have a Bachelor of Music. And my attitude was, in my own head, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. You have no idea how much work is involved. But if I know anything about Alex, he doesn't listen to any of that sort of stuff. He is an eternal optimist, whereas I, with my great knowledge of music, tend to be the pessimist. So I listened to Alex and I said, well, I thought to myself, we're just going to have to chase this one as far as it goes. And lo and behold, by the end of 2013, Alex had written a 3-hour musical with 1.5 hours worth of music, and he had got his Year 12 class performing it as part of their HSC or VCE requirements. And Alex has always been like that. He comes to us with these grand schemes and we think, where did this come from? And how on earth are you going to achieve it? But every so often he actually manages to achieve these things. So my pessimism about this project would just never have started. Perhaps Alex's optimism may have bitten off more than he could chew and ended up starting a project and not finishing it. But the fact is, the two of us, worked together on this project and we got it done. Quite an achievement. And then, of course, once he'd written the show, once it had been performed by his Year 12 class, the next thing he said was, well, I want to get it professionally performed. Which he did 2 years ago. You see? So he has these grand plans and he's able to see them through because of this infinite, it seems, optimism that he has. So getting things done is about the balance between the two. The realist who says, well, these are all the problems that you're going to meet in this project. But the optimist who is absolutely determined that no matter what gets in his way, he's going to do it. I want to finish with a quotation from Swedenborg again, and one you may know, one I find very useful and very inspiring. Eternal rest is not idleness, for idleness produces languor, sluggishness, numbness and drowsiness of the mind, and consequently of the whole body. And these are death, not life. Much less the eternal life which the angels of heaven enjoy. Eternal rest, therefore, is a rest that dispels these states and enables a man to live. And it is only this that elevates the mind. It consists, therefore, in some pursuit or occupation by which the mind is aroused, quickened, and delighted. And this follows according to the use, from which, in which, and for which the work is performed. Thus the whole heaven is viewed by the Lord as a sphere of uses, and every angel is an angel according to his use. The delight of use bears him along as a favourable current does a ship, causing him to be in eternal peace and in the rest of peace. This is the meaning of eternal rest from labours.